ladies and gentlemen, Luke Thompson Moritz.
Oh, I didn't know you were going to do me first. Okay. Hi.
Give me an intro.
I'm Luke. I like comics a fair amount. This is us doing. This is Comic DNA doing. I'm taking over now. This is Comic DNA doing the first book of iZombie, the first trade paperback of iZombie. And I'm going to hand it back off to Aaron because he's much more knowledgeable.
Tell them who I am.
Oh, you! That's right, you. And hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Aaron Walther.
Yeah, all right. So, as Luke kind of said just a second ago,
I would say fumbled.
This is the third episode of Comics DNA.
This is still going.
We are still going, and for the record, this is the third episode we've recorded. We have not put any of the previous two episodes up to listen to.
I've got it.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm not saying that as a. I'm not
a rack of ribs. Why don't you stop grilling me?
So, we're going to talk about iZombie tonight. Now, iZombie is a pretty recent book. It was first published in 2010, I believe. It is written by Chris Roberson, and it's drawn by Mike Allred. Now, one of those two names most comic book fans probably already recognize. He is kind of a legend in comic books. I am, of course, talking about Chris Roberson. No, I'm just kidding. I love Chris Roberson's writing, and I don't mean to joke about him, but Mike Allred is clearly a very prominent creator. From his work in Madman up through his various Marvel works, he was drawing X-Force. When he did his X-Force series with Peter Milligan, that's when I first really got turned on to him. I'd read some of his Madman stuff, but his X-Force was what really hooked me.
It's a story about the X-Men. You might have heard of them once or twice.
Yeah, they're in a comic book, and he also recently, I think, did some Fantastic Four stuff. But he's done a lot of creator-owned stuff, some stuff at Vertigo. Mike Allred is a prolific creator who has an instantly recognizable art style. Very, very retro, very 50s pop art.
That's one of the first things I noticed going into this too. So
his art style is unmistakable. And for this comic, iZombie, he's joined by his lovely wife, Laura Allred, who provides the colors, which really just kind of complete the whole Allred style.
Oh yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about Chris Roberson. I don't mean to sound like I'm giving him the shaft. I honestly
you're giving the other guy the
shaft. I'm not super familiar with Chris Roberson. This actually was the first thing of his that I'd ever read. I understand that he has self-published some stuff through his own imprint, Monkey Brain Comics, and he has he's a novelist. He's been published multiple times. Like this is a guy who does make a living as a writer. So congratulations and good for him. I first heard about him actually when he started doing the Fables spin-off series, the Cinderella series. I think that's when I first heard of him. I don't remember if that came out before or after iZombie. That's when I started paying attention to him. Basically, it was all around the same time he did iZombie, and then he started. He got the spin-off series for Fable, and then he was writing Superman all of a sudden, and then he had a very public falling out with DC where he basically condemned them for the way they treat creators in an interview. Not like it wasn't like I don't mean to sound like he was like telling them off or anything, but he made some comments basically saying that he didn't agree with the way DC treated creators, and I think that was it displayed a lot of backbone on his part to really just kind of stand up for what he believed in, and as a result, he no longer gets work at DC Comics. So, but he knew that he definitely.
I would hope that he knew that.
He definitely knew what he was getting into. Well, I mean, I've seen him have to give numerous follow-up interviews to explain himself because
that's kind of a big stance.
Yeah, something like that, people are going to jump all over it. But based purely off of his writing in iZombie, I really like Chris Roberson. He seems like a really, really cool dude, and he writes a cool comic book.
It's so believable.
Yeah.
For being such an unbelievable premise, it's so believable.
So we are going to talk a lot about iZombie. You might have heard some buzz about iZombie because I believe it was just optioned for a TV pilot. Is that correct?
Yes. They did a big highlight reel of their upcoming shows, I guess, this fall, early, or later fall kind of thing. There was a little snippet of what I believe was the iZombie trailer.
Oh, interesting.
Snippet.
I didn't realize it was that far along.
It was very, very subtle, very brief, and I'm familiar with the character, Gwen, the main character, and when I saw this girl in this trailer, it didn't even specifically say that it was iZombie, but when I saw this girl in this trailer, my first instinct was, that has to be iZombie. Like, who else would they have this platinum white hair with this pale-skinned girl? Like, what other show would that be?
Right.
And since I knew that the show was going to come out, I just pieced 2 and 2 together. So the internet was abuzz about that for a while. They haven't done anything else with it yet, but
I think
the characters look good so far.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I'm really curious to see how iZombie would work as a TV show, because as is something we might kind of talk about as we kind of get into the book more. But as I read iZombie, it feels like it has a lot of crossover appeal. As a comic book, it feels like it could translate easily into a TV show. It's quirky. It's got a large cast of characters, but it's kind of small locations. It's all kind of like
Paranormal's kind of hot right now, also.
Well, yeah, Paranormal is hot, and like. So, there's always going to be that. People are always going to try and make those kind of shows. But what I mean to say is, like, we're just going through the first 5 issues here tonight, and going through these 5 issues, it's all kind of like set in like very easily filmed locations. There's
it's
a graveyard,
in Oregon, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all. First of all, it's set in real world locations. It's all set in Portland, Oregon. And it uses a lot of actual locations in the comic.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Chris Roberson is from Portland, Oregon, so it's all very. It's a comic that's very representative of Oregon, as I understand it. I've never been to Oregon, so I couldn't say. But from the things that I've read, that it's very, very authentic. But what I mean to say is, like, there's a lot of like. You look at this and you can see kind of like the sets as they're built. Like, there's the diner where the characters meet at. There's the graveyard where Gwen stays with her
Ellie.
ghost friend Ellie. And then you have, like, the scary mansion as a set piece, and you have various like city set pieces. But I guess, like, what I was saying was this is a comic that could easily translate to a TV show,
which shown by them making. The TV show.
As shown by them making the
TV
show. They
realized that, oh, hey, this is a really good idea.
But as somebody who is a wannabe comic book writer, whenever I read something, I'm always studying the craft of how it is written, and what the writer and the artist how they present their comic and what they do with it. So that was one of the first things that stuck out to me, was how easily this could translate. And that's not meant to sound like a criticism. That is a criticism that gets used in a lot of comics these days, is that a lot of comics
are just kind of like made for TV, made for film kind
of. Well, they're not made to be a comic. They're made to be a pitch for a film, or made to be a pitch for Hollywood.
Because that's the end game, essentially.
That's where
most people think.
That's where the money is.
Right.
That's where it's a common criticism of Mark Millar's work. Mark Millar is a guy who makes a lot of like 4 or 5 issue miniseries, and they all feel like they're just designed to be a pitch for a movie. And
in that context, I can see it being a criticism.
It is used as a criticism against Mark Millar. But the point is that, it works for Mark Millar. Like, Mark Millar is like king of the Hollywood adaptation. Like, Mark Millar is a guy who's had numerous big franchise, well, not franchises, but big movies built out of his comics. I mean, you know, you've had Wanted, you've had the recent Kick-Ass movies. There's another one I can't think of, but like all of his comic concepts. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to edit out how many times I said concepts there.
I've already got it.
all of his comic concepts. The big criticism is that they feel like he's just writing them to be sold to Hollywood to be turned into a movie. And I'm not necessarily interested in reading comics that are written with that in mind, because I care about comics and I don't so much care about movies. Which is not to say that I don't love a good movie, but I really love comics. So I don't mean that to sound like a criticism against iZombie, because I think iZombie is an amazing comic, and I guess what I mean to say is I'm really impressed by how well it presents itself as both a comic that really stands on its own as a comic that could also easily cross over to a TV show setting.
As I have been reading this, throughout these past couple days, that was the first thing I noticed was it feels like a CW show already. Mm-hmm. Like, just certain aspects of it feel like a CW show. Like, I could picture these on my TV kind of thing. And like you were saying, it's so impressive that it has that fine line between being presentable as a TV show and being presentable as a very fine comic.
Mm-hmm. So I've rambled on about that at length. Luke, why don't you tell me how you first came across iZombie?
Well, it was you, but
it's gonna be. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of comics on our podcast that start like that.
There's a few. There's some that, as we've discussed, other comics to read. I have heard about them through your suggestion, or so on and so forth. But with this was when we first met. I believe that was an early suggestion of yours, was to read this. I don't know how it got brought up. I'm not even really into zombie that much. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily like the genre all that much. Mostly it's kind of drowned out. I'm sick of it.
I think it probably just got brought up just because when we, around the time we first met, we were working together. That would have been right when this was coming out, and I was super jazzed on this book as it was coming out. I'm reading all the original issues. Luke is reading the trade. I mean, it's not like we're going back really far here. This is like 4 years ago, but when it came out, I was super jazzed on it, and I think we may have been talking comics, and you were just like, "What's a good comic to read?" And I was just
that
like,
is exactly what happened.
iZombie.
Yes, you suggested it to me through that.
It's like, if you want to read a good comic, read iZombie.
And the first thing I noticed, even before I started reading the book, the cover of the trade was incredibly gorgeous. Mm-hmm. The art was so unbelievably detailed. The cover is the split face of Gwen, where it's
the cover to issue 1.
Yeah, her normal face and
with the zombie face.
Yeah. And I saw this and just went like, wow, that is so incredibly detailed for being washed out colors like they are. For being muted colors, they are so vibrant, and they just popped right out at me. And
it's a good looking cover.
Yes, and I instantly just went, okay, I'm going to take this suggestion. I need something to read. And yeah, that's how I found out about it first. As I began to read it, I obviously fell in love, but that is how I found out about it, was from your suggestion.
Mm-hmm. So,
most importantly, how did you find out about it?
I found out about it the way a lot of people find out about comics. I was in the comic book shop. No, actually, in the comic book shop. I guess
they still have those?
Yeah, they still have those. I guess you're right. Maybe nowadays everybody finds out about comics on the internet. I probably saw a press release online somewhere, maybe Comic Book Resources or Newsarama or something. But I was pretty... when this came out, I was still pretty plugged in to the goings-on of mainstream comics. I'm not so much plugged in anymore. I don't have time for it because I spend all my time trying to make my own. But, when this issue came out, Vertigo does or at least Vertigo was doing a thing where the first issue of a book was just $1. Really, they're basically just selling it
Wow.
at cost just to try and get the first issue into everybody's hands, and it worked because I bought a lot of Vertigo first issues, and this was one of them. And it really didn't take much convincing. I would have bought this one at full retail price, $2.99, $3.99, because I'm a big fan of Mike Allred, and I pretty much would have read anything that he was drawing. So I kind of was just hooked on this just from the creators, the names on it. As I said before, I really wasn't familiar with Chris Roberson, but I'll take a look at anything Mike Allred draws. So, and then after I got the first issue and started reading it, I realized that it was pretty good, and I read it. I got all the issues. Yeah. So, Luke, why don't we're going to talk about the first 5 issues, which comprise the majority of the first trade paperback. I believe the trade paperback has some short stories in it that were collected in some anthologies also, but I only read the first 5 issues. That comprises the first story arc of the comic. Luke, why don't you kind of run us through what's the overall plot of this first story arc as you see it?
The overall plot is, as it first introduces us to the characters, gets us to like the characters, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And then when we find out that Gwen has to...
Let me ask you, who are the main characters of this?
Oh, okay, well, more specifically.
More specific. Just,
Gwen
lay down the main characters.
What?
Yeah, lay down the main characters for us.
All right. Gwen the zombie. Gwen, I believe, yeah. Gwen the zombie. Ellie the ghost. Mm-hmm. I feel like these are just too generic. I feel like I need to be more scriptive with them.
Well,
but
that's kind of the selling point of the book is the characters all kind of have this like old cartoon style, like Groovy Ghoulies, where each character is kind of a representation of some kind of Hollywood monster. So you have the zombie, you have the ghost, you have the werewolf, sort of. You've got the mummy, the vampire.
Vampires,
yeah. But you have... it's obviously the book is a take on monsters as like the traditional Hollywood monsters specifically.
Which I thought was hilarious, how each of these characters... I almost want to say a deconstruction of the tropes that are associated with each of the characters, but I'm not sure if that would be the correct word. But it's a deviation from the norm on each of these characters.
Yeah, it definitely has fun with your expectations.
Which I thought was great that they introduced very early on in the first couple of pages, that like this book's going to be funny. Mm-hmm. You know, they started cracking jokes at one another. The characters seemed organic with one another, and that's what really sold me on it. I love reading a comic that like I could picture these characters in front of me having this conversation kind of thing. It feels very organic, natural, and I loved it first and foremost. And as I've already said before, the art on this is stellar. That was another big selling point for me, was that...
Oh, definitely.
The art was incredible. The colors were so unbelievably vibrant and just very, very eye-pleasing, and so on and so forth. But anyways, the main characters were Gwen the zombie, Ellie the ghost, Scott / Spot, the werewolf. I'm going to use that right now. And then the mummy gets introduced gradually throughout the first couple issues, and he becomes the, I guess, antagonist, sort of.
Well, he starts off as the antagonist.
Yeah. And
as well, also the vampires start off kind of as antagonists.
Yes, the vampires as well. I forget because they are this big clique that I forget to associate them as a character.
It's a coven of vampires.
Yes, which I've got more to say about that too because it's hilarious. What it starts introducing at the end of the first book is that she needs to eat a brain to retain her middle ground, as you would. She's a zombie, but she also is kind of human still. And it dives into that later, but the first time I read that, I didn't even really, piece it together.
Yeah.
I just thought, oh, okay, every character so far is this deviation from the norm of typical monsters. You know, the ghost is this girl from, what was it, the 60s, I believe?
Yeah.
Ellie
is the girl that died in the 60s.
And
so she's kind of this, like, so she's stuck in her time period. So she's like this 60s mod queen.
Which I adore. I think that's hilarious. I think her as a character is adorable. And so whenever I saw Gwen, I just thought, okay, every one of these characters is this untraditional monster. Cool.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. As it progresses, you find out more about what she really is, and in my mind, I went, whoa, that's way better.
Yeah.
That's way better than what I originally thought. And, like, as it starts, developing, and when she eats this brain for the first time, it starts introducing the actual, I guess, main plot of this first arc. Mm-hmm. She needs to settle the guy's business that she ate the brain of. He was murdered, I believe, right?
Well, yeah, like the basic, I guess you could say, like the basic selling point or the basic pitch. It's all done really well in the first issue. Is where it gives us Gwen. It sets her up. You have this character. She's a zombie, but she
and a gravedigger, which is hilarious too.
Right. But. Well, she works as a gravedigger. She has to eat one brain a month, or she will turn into like a decaying,
Romero zombie.
Shambling George Romero zombie.
Which reference.
Yeah. So in order to retain her intelligence, she has to eat a brain once a month. And whenever she eats a brain, she also, not only does she get to keep her own consciousness, but she absorbs the memories and kind of the spiritual consciousness of the person whose brain she eats. So the first issue sets all this up, like really, it almost feels like a pitch, like a classic TV pitch, where it's all set up right here. You have your character. She's a non-traditional hero. She's a young woman, she's a zombie, and she's got this little quirk where she has to eat brains, and then she is compelled to settle the spirit of the person whose brain she eats. So any unresolved business they have, she feels like she has to take care of it for them.
Part of it is that obligation, and then second off, from my understanding, the voice won't stop talking.
Yeah, she hears their voice in her head of what they were feeling, what they think, who people they know. So you have this really good setup for what I would call like a quirky twist on the detective genre. The book, honestly, it makes me think a lot of the first issue, I should say. Yeah. This setup in this first issue makes me think a lot of that TV show Pushing Daisies,
yes.
Which I don't know if you've seen any of that, but that was a similar thing. Similar in that it was like quirky, vibrant, bright colors, kind of a dark fantasy style, and the main character was a guy who could bring dead people back to life by touching them. But then there were these rules. Similar to Gwen's rules of having to eat a brain once a month, this guy, the pie baker in the show I was just talking about, Pushing Daisies. In Pushing Daisies, if he keeps them alive for more than a minute, then somebody else has to die to take their place. But he can never touch them, because if he touches them again, then they will die again forever. So you have these like very specific rules set up for how everything has to operate, and that's like what Pushing Daisies was. It had all these very specific rules for like a quirky detective show where somebody would be murdered, and the pie baker, his private detective friend, would bring him in. They would bring the dead person back to life and try and get the information of how they were killed, and then solve the murder and collect the money.
Sort of like it was a formula show.
It's a formula, yeah. That's the formula. And then you had the character development with Pushing Daisies was the pie maker. His childhood sweetheart. She died, and he brought her back to life, and he kept her alive. So they're in love, and they want to start a romantic relationship, but he can never touch her, or she will die again. That is like a made for TV. These are the rules. This is the formula. Now just plug all the stories into that formula. iZombie kind of goes down that road with its setup. You have, like I was saying, with Gwen, she has to eat a brain. She absorbs their memories, and now she has to set things right with the dead person's life. That's where the first issue ends, basically.
The first issue ended with her eating the brain, like in the grave. Yeah,
and that's where you get the whole she starts hearing their voice, and she's got visions of how they died, and she's gonna catch the killer for them because maybe that'll shut you up. That's what she says.
Another exactly. Another nod to the humor of the book also that I thought was really nice was the last line of the panel was, "I'm a zombie after all." Did I forget to mention that?
Yeah, that was a good, like, again, this is all like very very well structured storytelling. You get introduced to the character. You can tell she's kind of weird. She meets her ghost. You're talking to the ghost friend, and then the issue ends with, "Oh, by the way, I'm eating a brain. I am a zombie." You know, like.
Right, iZombie.
Yeah, like you knew that going into it, but you didn't know. Now you're being told.
I mean, it's not like it's in the title or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that was a very good setup into the overarching plots of this paperback. I guess these 5 issues.
Yeah.
Of that, she's got this guy. She just ate this guy's brain. She's got these memories from this guy that she sees these memories that he was murdered, and that she wants to figure out who did it, and that on the flip side, he also won't stop talking to her in her head. So
yeah, she keeps hearing his voice.
Right, and it's like she feels like such a quintessential teenager in a book, but it's not a teenager, I guess, like a young adult, like right on the cusp of adulthood teenager kind of thing, and it was like that. Made me think of that.
She's a young, hip girl in her 20s.
Exactly. And it was like that line at the end of the book made me think that was the, I just want to solve this guy's murder so the memories will stop, so shut up, kind of thing. And it was like, oh, okay, I see where this is going. And obviously, as it continues, she gets a little more into it, I guess. Or she gets a little more involved, I guess, instead of it just being like I just want him to shut up. She actually starts, like, getting interested in what's happening. I thought it was kind of funny in the next issue. I believe it was the next issue or third issue where she is talking to the wife of the husband that died.
Yes.
And she was like, "I need to say something to you," and in the little black box it said, "I love you." Then it's like, "Shut up."
Yeah.
I'm not asking you.
Yeah.
I thought that was a funny nod.
Yeah,
I thought that was a funny little thing.
It was a good scene.
Yeah, so I love the vampires in this book, or in the rest of the story after the first issue. I love the vampires so much because when I think of a vampire, the last thing I think of is like sassy bitch girls.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really, really funny way to turn vampires on their head, and I also love that their paintball course was called Bloodsport. I got a gigantic laugh out of that.
The Bloodsport thing was pretty good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am very partial to Ellie for some reason. I think her character is adorable. I like ghosts.
She's
I like
a good
the
character.
idea of a ghost in the story.
She really plays, like, as a character, I think she really plays to Mike Allred's strengths, because, like, all the clothing design he gets to do for her hair, her mannerisms. Mike Allred is a guy who's like made a name for himself as like a pop art 60s kind of a guy.
Okay.
That's what his art is all kind of like in stylized of a reference to. So Ellie as a character is like built for Mike Allred. Like, I have to imagine that if Ellie wasn't Mike Allred's idea, then Ellie was written for Mike Allred, because
with him specifically in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Like a ghost who is a young blonde girl from the '60s who
stuck in the '60s.
Yeah, who is like basically like a young Beatles fan. Just like that type of a stereotype girl. That is a for Mike Allred type of a character. So yeah, she's a great character.
I also felt like Ellie is kind of a really good way to keep Gwen grounded, I guess. Like, Gwen is... trying to think of a way to explain it. Like, Ellie is such a good parallel to Gwen.
Gwen is kind of cynical. Gwen is a little bit more modern, so she's kind of cynical and sarcastic.
Right.
And Ellie is, like, pure and innocent and naive.
Optimistic and, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really neat parallel that they drew there.
Yeah, they play off each other very well.
Yes. I also loved that Spot, whatever you want to call him,
that's a good joke.
Gigantic computer nerd, and that he's such an... I don't remember directly. Do they introduce that he's a werewolf in this book, or in this issue, in issue 2?
It's in the second issue, I believe, where they do the whole were-terrier thing.
Yeah, and the second I found out that he was a were-terrier, I loved that so much, because it introduces him at the beginning of this issue as a computer geek. He works at tech support. It starts with the classic tech support line, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?"
Yeah. I mean, he's a character right out of the IT Crowd or Big Bang Theory.
Right.
And
like,
he's that
the
kind
fact
of guy.
that he is a were-terrier, like, he's not even a more intimidating breed of dog.
Yeah,
I thought that was hilarious.
It's like the cutest dog.
Right. And it's like, really, like, you turn into a lycanthrope terrier on full moons? Okay.
Yeah.
And I thought that was hilarious. I also love that he is the typical guy in Gwen and Ellie's friendship circle.
Yeah.
Like, they're mean to him in like a playful way kind of thing. They pick on him, and like he just keeps coming around even though he's
it's a good it's kind of a good, like, the were-terrier is a visual metaphor for the type of character that Scott is. Like, he's a puppy dog. He's kind of lovesick. He follows Gwen around. He'll do anything.
The lovesick thing, as noted by
he's got the
big order to the doll or whatever.
Yeah, he bought the doll for her. He will do anything she asks, like, no matter what, at risk to him. Like, he will put anything aside just to please her. Like, it's a good rounded character.
It's a very good dynamic between the three also. Like, they all uniquely bring something to the table towards this group dynamic, and I just can't get over the fact that he's a were-terrier.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Yeah, it's good. It's a fun, instead of him just being a typical werewolf, like instead of being like a weirdo furry, it's
right.
It's like,
and things do that, like, where it'll be this, like, it'll be the little nerdy guy that turns into the gigantic hulking werewolf, and it's like,
I'm thinking of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Wasn't it? What's his name?
I can't remember the name, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
The kid from Austin Powers. What's his name?
Oh, Mike Myers.
yeah, him. All you Buffy fans and Robot Chicken fans are probably screaming at me because his name's on. He's a famous guy. Like, he's cool and funny. I can't think of his name right now, but yeah, that to me is like such a good twist on like a Joss Whedon type character, where instead of being like this cool awkward guy who turns into like a badass, he's a cool awkward guy who turns into an cool awkward were-terrier. Yeah,
you're right. And like, I believe whenever you first introduced me to this book, that was a big selling point that you used on me. Was you're like, it's a zombie, it's a ghost, and it's a were-terrier. Yeah. And I thought, like, wait, what? Did you mean to say that?
Yeah.
I loved, as this progressed, I love when they try to introduce whenever they introduce the internet or whenever the internet gets brought up, and Ellie's like...
Yeah, they're trying to explain the internet to Ellie. And
she's like, you can get all this information on the internet?
Intranets?
What's that? And then Gwen says, at least she's been dead for 40 years. What's my excuse?
Yeah.
I just thought that was so funny, and little quirky one-liners like that keep making me fall in love with Gwen.
Mm-hmm.
And like this, she's such a believable young hip adult hip adult archetype.
Yeah, she's cute and naive, and that's attractive.
As noted by the I can't remember his name, Horatio, I believe,
Yeah.
who is just like stricken by this girl. And
Horatio is Horatio. Well, we'll have to talk about those characters specifically. Horatio and his partner.
The other guy's name is so confusing.
They have like very non-traditional names.
Yeah.
But no, Horatio is the one that falls in, not in love, but he has a thing for
Stricken.
Gwen. He and Gwen have a thing, not with Ellie.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the Fossers. That's right. The Fossers organization.
Well, why don't you, since we're at that point, why don't you go ahead and explain to me what those characters are in the context of this book? Because they're introduced pretty early on.
Yeah, I believe it's book 3 whenever Gwen finally goes to confront the mummy. After she confronts the mummy, I'm sorry. I love this so much real quick now that I think about it. When she's talking with the mummy and he's walking her through the pyramids, like Egypt, ancient Egypt and everything, there's a specific panel where as he's walking into his past lives, he is halfway between Mike Allred's style and an old-timey like comic book style with like stippling and everything on it.
Yes.
I adored that. The first second I saw that, I went, oh my god, that is neat. Neat is the only word I could think of.
That was a good coloring thing.
Yes, and throughout that page, as he's talking to Gwen throughout his previous lives, she's like standing in the gutter of the page and everything, talking to him. Yeah, I thought that was a really, really neat organization.
No, that's the type of like expert page layout that you get from a guy like Mike Allred.
And for me, I've never read anything that he's been an artist on. So this was my first exposure to it, and I'm definitely a fan. That
double page spread specifically, and that's in issue 4, where he's explaining the mummy, which I guess we should go ahead and we should explain. The mummy is revealed to be.
He kind of segues right into the Foster organization.
He's the killer who killed the guy
who killed Frederick.
Who killed Frederick? Who was the guy that whose brain Gwen had to eat? So Gwen goes to confront him, and he knows all about her. He basically just invites her in, like, he's got kind of that creepy, like, know-it-all villain, like, you don't really know what's going on. I'm going to try and explain some things to you.
Especially because as Ellie sneaks into his house, because she's a ghost, who's going to see her?
Yeah.
She sneaks into his house, and he instantly knows she's there. Like, he says, hello, ghost.
And then they become friends.
Yeah, it's very, very ominous. Like, what's this guy's deal? What, who is he?
You have, he's kind of trying to explain things to Gwen about the history of the monsters types people. He kind of explains that, the whole concept of the oversoul and the undersoul, which
I thought was great.
Well, that was really well done. That's not that's not entirely new to Chris Roberson, to this book. I believe that's some theories that have been used in other fiction and other philosophy, but he's using it really well in this comic. And
part of it too is because each one of those things has either been talked about or introduced already.
Well, it all.
Now they're just linking back to it.
He's stringing it all together really well. Like he's stringing all this philosophy in with the traditional Hollywood movie monsters really well.
Yes.
And so you have the mummy character who, what was his name? Amon, I think, maybe something like that. I've already forgotten.
I've been calling him the mummy.
Yeah, the mummy. You have this beautiful double page spread where he's going through the history of the Fossers, which are this group of people who they're supposed to be the good guys, and it's their purpose, their mission in life to kill all these monsters. And they always wear white, and he's kind of going through history where there's there's a knight, and you have like pirate ninjas characters, and like a Doc Samson type adventurer. But this double page spread is really beautiful, where the mummy is in the panel in the old Ben Day Dot style coloring, where he's fighting off one of the Fossers while explaining things to Gwen, and Gwen is in the gutters in the modern coloring, just kind of viewing it all, observing it all. It's this type of hallucination where he's like walking her through his memories, and that is like a really excellent example of comics being comics. Like, this is not the type of thing that you could do on a television show. You could do other things, to show the separation of the characters, but this is a perfect example of master comics craftsmen, where you're using everything that is exclusive to comic books. You have a character inside of a panel, you have characters outside of panels, and you have them interacting with each other, and it creates this type of surreal landscape that can only make sense inside of a comic book. You couldn't do it like this in anything else. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of my favorite.
I feel like it's too unique of a thing to where we could just pass over it. Like, it needs to be brought up and respected, because it's stellar, frankly.
Well, like I said, Mike Allred is a master. Chris Roberson clearly knows how to write a script. This is a good comic, and these are the types of things you expect from people who know what they're doing.
Yes. I love Horatio also. Oh,
explain. Yeah, I was just going to say. So, talk a little bit about the Fossers, who these characters are.
Horatio and
Hey, let me. I got the issues in front of me.
Just flip to it real quick.
I'm trying to find where they're talking to each other.
Technical difficulties. I apologize for the inconvenience.
He says the other guy says Horatio like all the time.
I know, it makes me so mad.
Diogenes, is that it?
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
there it is, Diogenes.
D-I-O. How do you spell this?
Diogenes. Diogenes.
What the hell kind of name is that?
It's an old Greek name.
Okay, so the Fossers introduced in the modern times. There was, as we were saying, as Amon was walking Gwen through his memories, it introduced the Fossers as a whole and individual eras Fossers, and I can see where, like, Assassin's Creed can, like, Assassin's Creed has this, each era has their own assassins, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, this definitely kind of is stylistically kind of parallel to something like that.
Yes.
Except because it's a comic book and not a video game, it's insanely cooler.
Much cooler.
Take that.
So, yeah, right? Get out of here, Ubisoft.
Video games.
So, the Fossers introduced in the modern time, Horatio and Diogenes?
Diogenes.
Diogenes, okay. Let me try that again. The Fossers introduced in this era, Horatio and Diogenes, they are introduced as they are hunting the vampires early on in this paperback. They get word and evidence that vampires are loose in the city, or there is a vampire in the city, specifically just one. And as the story progresses, the other vampires are trying to illustrate how bad it is to go into the city. Like, it's kind of foreshadowing that the Fossers are the real deal. Like, these guys are bad, bad for monsters.
They get the job done.
Yes.
They kill monsters. That's what they do.
Right, and one of the vampires ends up seducing one of Spot's friends, and that is the first. What I feel is the first display of the Fossers' expertise in taking out these monsters. Like, it's trying to show that, like, these vampires are, very. I guess since they're female, I get this, like, succubus vibe, sort of.
Yeah, they definitely are kind of like succubus-style vampires. Like, they even talk about that, how the Coven of Vampires runs the paintball Bloodsport facility, and they have the big meeting where the leader is going on about how they need to start getting more parties, and she specifically talks about, like, bachelor parties and things like that. So they're definitely playing up the sensual nature of vampires. And like you said, like succubus style, it's just a bunch of hot, attractive young women who are trying to seduce men in with their sexiness and then kill them.
Right, and they're trying. And with the Coven, normally they were trying to bring the bachelors to them instead of going out to feed.
Yes.
Because they even note that previously they left a trail of bodies behind, and they don't want to do that again.
Right, yeah, they got a whole system in place. People...
It's working to a degree.
They suck them into the paintball field, and then they take care of business there, and then it's all clean and efficient. You don't have people leaving bodies and blood trails out in the city leading back to them.
So that's why the head of the coven is so furious that the redhead is going out into the town and doing exactly what they told her not to.
Right.
So Diogenes and Horatio get wind of this vampire in the city, and right as the vampire is about to seduce the guy, they step in and take care of business. They're intense. They have pretty decent chemistry together, which I thought was kind of funny. Like, it's a whole good cop, bad cop kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, they're action heroes. You know, they banter, they make jokes, they fight monsters, they kill monsters, and then they do all the dirty work. You know, they got to clean it up.
They're being the good guys.
Yeah.
And they even note that to Spot's friend.
Yeah.
That we're the ones you don't want to mess with.
Yeah, we're keeping you safe.
Yeah, we're here to keep you safe.
If
you hear word of this, or if we hear word that this got out, we're gonna come after you next. You know, don't say anything. No one's gonna believe you because it's pretty surreal. Like, who would believe that? Frankly,
right.
And I also love that Horatio is very quote unquote old fashioned. He is, he killed the vampire with a silver knife.
Yeah,
and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, I like that. Diogenes is like, I have silver bullets.
Right,
we
can shoot him with a gun. Kind of makes me think of that Dread thing. A bullet would interfere with your powers more.
A bullet might interfere with your powers more.
But I was interested to note, or I was interested that Horatio uses the old style camera, and he was about to allude to why he did, and he didn't.
Yeah, that was like
is that important?
That was like a cute little character quirk. Like, Horatio just carries around a Polaroid camera, and
it's got some emotional significance to him.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if that was like a legitimate thing that gets explained later, but case in point, it just got me curious because they didn't finish the thought.
Right.
Yeah. So the Fossers seem to be this no nonsense as a whole. It comes down to individual people joking with one another, but as a whole, it's this no-nonsense monster hunting organization. I don't know if it introduces more people from the Foster organization throughout the story.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
you've only read these first 5 issues, right?
Correct,
yeah. So, yeah, it builds a lot in the next
because it's already got me
issues.
Curious, like, what's the rest of this organization got in store if these two ding-dongs were able to, dispatch a vampire that easily.
Yeah.
And I also thought it was funny that the one guy that Gwen introduces herself to happens to be someone that might hunt her. Yeah,
that's the whole, like, almost like sitcom-esque. Like,
I could hear a laugh track.
Yeah, that's
right
like
into each
like
other.
Gwen. You have Gwen. She's a lonely girl with a secret. The secret is she's a zombie, so it's hard for her to get close to people. And then she meets a guy, and he like really likes her, and they kind of
like the same things.
Yeah,
they
like the same things. They have a good first date, and it's all awkward. And then she finds out it's like, oh, your job is to hunt and kill monsters. Oh, I better not tell you that I'm a monster then. Laugh track.
Right, and I thought, right. I thought it was neat too that as Amon is talking to her and revealing these things to her, revealing who the Foster organization is. Like,
yeah,
it was nice, or not even nice. It was upsetting that she finds out this guy is, something that she's supposed to resent, I guess, and it's just trying to show that like she just met Amon and he's already in her head.
Yeah,
it just showing his true like suave, sophisticated nature. I thought it was nice too that they didn't beat around the bush and waste any time, and he just said, "Wait, why would I deny that I'm the killer? I did it."
Yeah,
I completely did it. I wouldn't hide that.
Yeah,
and I thought that was great. I thought that was a nice little
and
quirk to his character.
Amon gives her his whole like, I don't kill innocent people. I only kill people that
the Robin Hood.
Yeah,
like
he's like Amon is a character who has come to terms with what he is. He says,
yes. He's had centuries to do so.
He's had centuries to do so, and he says, I have to kill people in order to stay alive, to continue my consciousness. So I am going to do that, but if I have to do that, then at least I'm going to make sure I'm killing people who won't be missed. Won't be missed, right. Killing people who aren't innocent is I think how he puts it.
Another thing that I was curious about with him, while we're talking about him too, before we go back to the conversation about the Fossers.
Yeah.
As he's talking to his cat.
Yeah, the tiger.
While he's talking to the tiger while he's on the balcony. He's saying, "Don't worry, my love. She'll come around eventually, and if she doesn't," he's talking about like something that's going to be coming up.
Yep.
It's this little bit of foreshadowing, and that since I haven't read these next issues after this, I don't know what it is. So
right, it becomes a whole thing.
Because this is the first time. Since this is the first time I'm going to be reading past it, I'm excited. I want to know what happens, and that's going to be interesting to say the least. Because if it's got him a little bit nervous, like he strikes me as this very powerful, very sure of himself guy. Like he doesn't seem to be scared by much.
Well, I mean, the structurally, how this comic was set up, Amon was introduced as the antagonist, and then after they introduce Amon, they quickly do not an about face, but they quickly say like Amon's not the real antagonist. He's like
there's something bigger.
You thought he was the antagonist, but actually he has an antagonist that's even worse than him that he's trying to prepare for.
He's the lesser of two evils kind of thing.
Kind of.
Yeah, well, yeah. To Gwen.
To Gwen.
She meets him and thinks that he's terrible and that he kills innocent people and blah, blah, blah. And then as he's explaining this and getting in her head, it's, it shows us as the reader like, oh, maybe he's not, so bad.
He's not pure evil per se.
Right. So that was great about Amon, and I'm really excited to see him get confronted by the Fossers. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited for that showdown. So back to the Fossers now. This little unawkward segue back into this. I loved at the beginning of the 5th issue, as they're burying this vampire after they've killed her. You can see that they've got a lot more chemistry than they've shown so far. Or not, I guess chemistry would be a correct word, but
it's classic buddy cop,
right? And it's like the first time I haven't hated that in a really long time, because most of the time it's just I get it. It's like a good cop, bad cop. They end up being friends, blah 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 blah. But I guess because of the context of the story and because of what these two dudes are really doing, it's just oh, this is actually kind of funny. Okay. And he's like, oh, if you don't do any of these jokes anymore, I'll buy you a whole pot of coffee.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, Grandpa's got jokes. All right. So, I believe in the 5th issue, is this where Spot's friend walks into his house and finds out he's a were-terrier?
That,
because there was 2 guys in the club when the vampire got introduced.
I think that's the end of the 4th issue, yeah.
Okay, he walks in on Spot.
Yeah, and he sees
were-terrier.
He sees Spot as a were-terrier.
I thought it was absolutely hilarious that the friend barely even registers it. He's just
thinks it's cool.
Yeah, let's play video games, whatever. Yeah. I don't care. I thought it was a little nice attention to detail too, that they were playing a zombie shooting game, and Spot said, "I don't feel right doing this."
Right, yeah.
It's just showing how in puppy love, that he is with Gwen. And
it was the end of the 3rd issue when they did that.
Was it the? Oh my god, really?
Yeah, they chug along with this story. They kind of get everything out pretty quickly.
And I like that so much because it doesn't beat around the bush. It doesn't try to do this deep rooted symbolism. It just puts everything on the surface, lets you piece it together, and if you don't see it the first time, it comes back, and you can just kind of piece all the stuff together and enjoy the story at your own pace, sort of thing. And I love that because it's great. Truly, that's just very impressive writing. The 5th issue starts to show the Coven leader to be a little bit more intimidating than she's let on so far. Mm-hmm. She starts to drift away from this whole succubus thing into she's pissed this is happening.
Yeah,
she's someone left the reservation against her orders directly and died because of it.
That's why you have rules. That's why you don't leave the reservation. That's why she's got to be the Miss Hard Rules. That's why she's a bitch.
Yeah, right. And she has to be. And it's like the story has done a good job of like when it first introduced Frederick after Gwen ate his brain, it makes you think like, oh man, this is terrible. Like this guy got murdered. I want to get to the bottom of it. And it introduces him on, and you start to find out more about Frederick, and you're like, oh, this guy is kind of a scumbag. Yeah. Okay, what's happening? It keeps throwing you these red herrings. And I felt like it was kind of the same way with the vampire. A little less so, but it was still there.
Yeah.
Near the end of the 5th book, on page 21, it introduced a blonde man staring at a picture of his sister. And he says, I miss you.
Yep.
What is the significance of him? Because it just seemed really sudden. Did I miss something?
No, you didn't miss anything. That was earlier in the series, a few issues ago. That was the guy that they ran into in front of the diner.
The one that she recognized.
And Ellie didn't want to look at him because she was afraid that she didn't know. She didn't know who he is, but she didn't. Her whole thing is she wants to keep contact with the locals at a minimum because she doesn't want to meet somebody that might recognize her from her past life when she was alive.
Because she's trying to hide the fact that she's a zombie.
Exactly, and that's who that guy is. Like they run past each other, and
okay, because he was very, very brief, just for that couple of panels. So I can understand why I missed him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's only in like a few panels in the first story arc. He obviously he comes back later on.
I would assume so. It's just I didn't, like I said, it was brief, so I didn't really.
Yep.
I didn't really think about it. As it starts to close on this last book, I loved when Gwen returns to the graveyard and Ellie's trying to talk to her about, hey, I didn't go talk to Spot, I got distracted, and I kind of laughed. I'm like, oh, yep, Gwen called that, okay, that's funny.
Yeah, yeah, that's right, she did say that.
Right, she said, yeah, she'll probably get distracted anyway, she won't make it to Spot.
And then she did.
When, I forgot to mention this, when Ellie returns home to the graveyard,
and all the other
ghosts come out and talk to her.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really, really nice, really subtle thing of expanding on her character a little bit more. That, like, it makes you think that Gwen is all Ellie has.
Yeah, I liked that too. How there's all these ghosts there, and the ghosts kind of have this whole like, we only deal with other ghosts kind of a thing. Like you don't,
because it even says like you can see a ghost if you try really hard, but only if they want to see you.
Only if they want. Yeah. So you have this thing where that's the friendship of Ellie and Gwen. Like Ellie wants to be with Gwen, and so Gwen sees Ellie, and they're friends.
I liked that a lot. Like I even liked Ellie being sassy with the other ghosts. That was just funny. It seems so organic from such an unorganic character. Heyo. But yeah, she was like, if you don't like it, you can get back in your coffin. It's right over there.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's such a untraditional way that I've never heard a ghost sass someone.
Well,
so it was a nice little.
It plays into Ellie's character because she's the teenager from the '60s. So this is the type. The '60s were the counterculture revolution. That was like the birth of the teenager. So you have Ellie. The ghosts are representing the parents, or the traditional way of doing things. And so Ellie is obviously, as a teenager, she's not going to listen to them, and she's going to argue with them. And so that's why you have the dialogue where she's arguing with the ghosts, and she says, "You sound just like my father," and that kind of ties into what Ellie's character is, which is that 60s mod teenager type of character, and
they just keep doing those little nods to it.
It's all represented very well,
right? And they just keep reminding you every now and again, like, "Oh, hey, don't forget she's from the '60s." Like, it's nice. Like, her character's so cute.
Yeah, she's a good character.
So, as Gwen finally returns home after this scene with Ellie, Gwen returns home and she's trying to toss around in her head, like, what am I going to do? I have so much to think about. What if what he says is true? Blah, blah, blah. This book, her thoughts are such an integral part to the story, whether it be her thoughts or the brain she ate's thoughts. Mm-hmm. So I love throughout this book that her thoughts are so integral. So this section, as she returns home, you can tell how truly distracted she is. It was just like a nice, tiny thing that I noticed, and it was nice. Like, when characters are deep in thought, artists, they'll have, like, thought bubbles and stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was like, in this specific scene, like, 2 separate conversations were going on. And that was really kind of neat to see. It's very, I can't think of the word. It was very...
Well, it's, I like it because that's another good example of what comics do really well, which is having the...
Internalizing.
Well, you can have the internal and external story at the same time. Movies can do this too, but you can...
With, like, voiceovers and stuff.
Yeah, but it can easily...
It seems so tacky.
Well, it can easily get distracting because you don't have the separation of the text on paper to read at your own pace. Like, with a movie, you got to keep up. You got to, like, okay, did he say that or think that? Okay, what did he say there? And, I mean, it can be done well. It can be done. I'm not saying that movies can't do it or shouldn't do it. But what I'm saying is... It's something that comics can handle really well. Having
much easier to distinguish, also.
Yeah, the dual narratives. You have the visual, you have the visual story, characters talking to each other, and then you have the internal textual story, which is what a character is thinking while the other story is going on. And you can, because of the way it's all text and pictures, you can see it and absorb it really clearly and really easily. So yeah, that's an example of comic storytelling at its best.
And then that's pretty much the wrap up of it. But the last line of the chapter, I'm a big fan of too as a tagline. Well, I'm just happy to be alive. Well, you know what I mean.
That was a good
going back into that quintessential Gwen.
Well,
like,
it was a good.
I could just like I can imagine the audience going like, "Oh, you."
It's a good punchline.
I
mean, the whole story arc ends with that punchline. And it's a good one. She's just happy to be alive. Well,
right. You know what I mean. So yeah, that's iZombie.
It's
book 1.
It's a good book. When I reread it, I read this many years ago when it first came out, and I reread it in preparation for us doing this podcast. It's really interesting. This was something that I immediately jumped out upon rereading. And it was really interesting that you said how the story keeps throwing out red herrings at you.
Yes.
And I found that I noticed that like it was an omnipresent situation with this first story arc. How I'm talking here as somebody who is a comic book writer who is fascinated with the craft of writing and the production of comics. So I'm reading this story arc, this 5 issues, and what we have through these 5 issues is there's a little bit of a story here, but most of it is just like constant setup. It's a setup, then a red herring, then a setup, then a red herring. And you'll notice what we were talking about, how the first issue sets up. We were talking about it being like a good crossover for a TV show. The first issue sets up like a perfect formula for a TV show. Main character is a zombie. She has to eat a brain once a month, absorbs the information of the brain, and then has to resolve the brain's issues. That's like, bam. That's a pitch you could make at a TV
for
studio.
like an hour-long TV
show. Yeah, for an
show.
Hour-long comedy drama. Like right there. That's all you need. Bam.
Right, like I can see the end of that episode just being like,
she's got
I guess I got to figure this mystery out.
Yeah, she's got a ghost friend. She's got a were-terrier, and that's your setup. Now, what's
interesting side note, real quick.
Go ahead.
I'm going to be mortified to see this were-terrier in live action.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
The makeup's going to.
It's either going to be an atrocious makeup job or unbelievably bad CGI.
It's going to have to be pretty good.
Yeah.
But so like I was saying, it's really interesting. The first issue, you have this perfect formula set up for like a TV show, and then as these 5 issues kind of go along, it basically completely abandons that, and it is not it's not a detective story. It's not a formula TV procedural. You know, it's they don't even, after the second issue, they don't even try to solve the murder of the guy, because they find out. They confront the mummy and he goes, "Yeah, I did it. The guy was guilty. He wasn't that innocent. I did it. Now here's all this other stuff that's going on." And so
the bigger picture.
Yeah. So the comic kind of, it's constantly subverting your expectations, which as an ongoing comic, when I was reading this month to month, I thought I think it's done really well as a monthly comic, because it's basically, this is classic comic book writing 101, where you are constantly stringing information along and you're keeping them coming back for month to month to month. As a 5-issue story arc, though, as like a trade paperback, I think it's kind of an interesting story, because it feels like there's not a lot of resolution, really. And what it ends up being is you have the first issue is sort of like a pitch for the series, and then by the time you get to the end of the story in the 5th issue, it becomes another pitch for a different series.
And necessarily, it could even just be, the next season kind of thing. Like if this were to be a pitch for iZombie,
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, like as this gets resolved at the end of the 5th book, or lack of a resolution, I guess you could say, I could just see this big cliffhanger at the end of the first season, like, what's really going on? Like,
yeah, there's a lot of that. Like, you have the mummy character who definitely plays that role of, I'm the bad guy, and now I think I'll tell you what's really going on.
He's monologue.
Yeah, he does some monologue, but yeah, I guess as far as like an individual story goes, it really is just like it's setting up a lot of different plot lines that are going to form a long-form ongoing series, which this kind of goes back to what I was saying with it feeling like it could easily cross over into TV. It could, but not in the way that a Mark Millar comic book feels like it could easily be a pitch for
because
Hollywood.
It's primarily designed to be a pitch,
right?
More or less.
Like when people use that cross like TV pitch as a criticism for Mark Millar's books, it's because it means there's nothing really like experimental or interesting about the pitch. It's usually just like a
safe. Very safe.
It's very safe, but it's also just like it's a story. It's a plot that can be summed up in a tagline. What if Batman was the bad guy? Bam! There's your TV show. That's the kind of thing you get from. And I should say, I don't mean to sound like I'm picking on Mark Millar here. I'm just talking about a lot of the recent stuff he's been publishing. We are not having a podcast where we're talking about the merits of Mark Millar's work, but it is a criticism that has come up about his recent work, and I'm only using it in the context of how I'm talking about iZombie, because the first issue of iZombie really did have that kind of this could be a TV show feel. And then as the issues go on further and further, it really does feel like it is actually an ongoing comic book.
Right.
Each issue kind of has like this little, basically like a little chunk of plot, and that little chunk of plot is dealt with and resolved inside the issue, but really all that happens is it opens up more questions and more plot lines.
Introduces another issue.
for the next issues. So it becomes, even though it's sold in story arcs, like it's done in story arcs, it really is one huge ongoing thing that kind of keeps going from each issue to the next. And now that seems to be the cool thing for TV. So I mean, I'm glad. I think that iZombie as a TV show could still work. It, like I was saying earlier, it kind of really does that balance between cool, kitschy, interesting, quirky comic book, but also readily translatable to a television format. And
like I said, paranormal is blowing up right now. So
yeah, that
paranormal, like zombies, Supernatural's gigantic right now.
Yeah. So it seems like the kind of thing that could work.
Now is its time.
Yeah.
Basically.
Now
if it would have came out when the comic was coming out, it was kind of still fresh.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So now is definitely a ideal time for it to come out.
Yeah. So it's a really good book. I'm not going to talk about the later issues because right now we're just talking about issues 1 through 5. But I do like the later issues. The story keeps me hooked. But and of course it's a great looking book. I mean, Mike and Laura, they're just at the top of their game. There's a reason these two are professionals and they can pretty much do whatever they want in the comic book industry. Mike, I believe Mike and Laura, most recently as of the recording of this, were just working on the Silver Surfer book with Dan Slott. I only read the first issue.
That would explain why I like the art so much.
Yeah, that was him. I only read the first issue, and it was, of course, it was absolutely gorgeous. I am an unapologetic fan of Mike Allred. I think he draws a fantastic comic book. And
from my understanding, did iZombie get canceled or did it end?
It was canceled. What we were talking about, I kind of mentioned earlier about Chris Roberson kind of severing ties with DC.
Yes.
Vertigo, which published iZombie, is owned by DC. And I'm really not going to speculate because I don't actually have any of the information in front of me and I don't know how much was given. But the series ended a little while after all of that kerfluffle. I don't know how much that had to do with it, if anything. I think it ran for I forget how many issues, like 20-something issues. I would have to look. And I'm looking at his Wikipedia now, and I can't find anything about it. iZombie. It ran for 28 issues, which is over 2 years. You know, that's almost 3 years, which is about what I would say is a pretty average comic book run for a new comic. That's average. Let me take that back. That's pretty average for a good comic. You know, a lot of comics. A lot of comics can have a hard time of it, especially indie comics. But a Vertigo book running about 30 issues kind of seems to be like about what they will do from the start of it to the end of it, unless it's like a huge runaway success, like your Sandman kind of a series. But so I have no idea the circumstances of it being canceled, but it was canceled. Like, Vertigo decided not to publish it anymore, and they brought it to a conclusion.
Okay. So yeah, that's iZombie book 1.
Yes. So I think that's pretty much all we can say about iZombie. It's a great book. I recommend.
Both of us obviously recommend
we
it.
both recommend it. That's why we're talking about it. I recommend the following issues. Luke, to you, of course. I recommend you read the rest of it if you liked the first 5 issues so much.
I would recommend keeping an eye out for the pilot whenever that inevitably airs on the CW.
Yeah, I will be curious about that.
The trailer definitely had me interested. The characters looked very close.
Mm-hmm.
The atmosphere looked very, dark, I guess. The scenery seemed very dark, zombie-like. So I have a feeling that will be a show that's worth checking out.
Yeah, I'm sure
at the very
be pretty
least,
interesting.
I'm happy to see the IP brought back.
Yep.
Even, just to see what I've already read.
Definitely.
Case in point, it's nice to see the name again.
Yep. So we might do more iZombie issues in the future, but for now, that's where we're going to leave it for the first 5 issues. The next episode of Comic DNA, I believe we agreed on. If we didn't agree on it, I'm declaring it right now. We are going to be reading Black Sad, which is a beautiful French comic by a couple of Spanish guys, I believe. Juan Diaz Canals, and Juanjo Garnido. I swear, I hope I'm pronouncing those names correctly.
By the time of recording, you will have it down.
I will. We can edit that. So,
yes.
yeah, next episode we will be reading and talking about Black Sad, which is one of my absolute favorite comics to come out in recent times. Well, we're doing a couple of recent comics here between iZombie and Black Sad. Black Sad, published by Dark Horse Comics. We'll be talking about the first volume to be published in America, which consists of the first 3 Black Sad stories. Luke, even as of this recording, you haven't read anything about it, or you haven't read the book, so you don't really know anything about it.
I don't know anything about it except that you like it a lot.
I like it a lot. You know that I like it a lot, so I'll be really curious to see your reaction. So yes, that brings us to the end of iZombie. Stay tuned for the next episode. We're going to talk about Black Sad. Thanks a lot, everybody, for listening. As always, you can read comics that I have written and drawn at newhavencomics.com. And Luke, you can find out anything that Luke wants to tell you about here.
Yes, mostly here. So.
Yes. So, yes.
I'm sure as of our next recording, I will have some sort of... I should probably do a Twitter or something. I don't know.
Ah, Twitter. Don't get me started. Okay, so... Thanks.
This is all closed captioning, behind the scenes business. So
yeah, thanks a lot for everybody for listening, and we're going to call it the end.